It was the morning of November 9th, 2005, in Robinson, Texas. This wasn't a town accustomed to violence. It was a peaceful, close-knit suburban haven, a quiet echo just south of the bustling city of Waco. But on this specific Wednesday, that tranquility was violently shattered with the raw, urgent sound of a phone call. A woman's voice, spiked with panic and the icy grip of terror, was dialed into 911. Her words were fractured, the details obscure, yet the tone alone delivered a chilling, undeniable message. Something horrific had just taken place inside her home. That singular, desperate call was the opening shot to a tragedy that would leave a tight community reeling, a family annihilated, and the wider public stunned by the dark truth soon to surface. This is the story of Darlene and Keith Gentry, a marriage that promised love, built on hope, was tested by heartbreak, and was ultimately consumed by profound tragedy. Darlene was born on November 2, 1974, the middle of three daughters in a devoted, loving family. From her earliest days, she carried a unique spark. Relatives and friends recall a girl who was nothing short of radiant, disciplined, and utterly full of life. A young woman who wasn't just externally beautiful, but possessed a warm heart and an intense drive. Growing up in Central Texas, Darlene quickly became a local sensation, instantly recognizable by her dazzling smile and signature blonde hair. She possessed a natural, magnetic ability to connect with everyone. Though she never officially wore a crown, her classmates and teachers unanimously bestowed upon her the nickname, the Texas Beauty Queen. She was voted prom queen, a core member of the Flag Corps, and the gravitational center of every school event. Her charm was never rehearsed or forced. It was effortless. Darlene Gentry stood out not just for her looks, but because of her genuine character. She possessed that rare quality that made people feel seen, admired by peers, and deeply loved by her family. She had a clear, ambitious path laid out before her. In 1993, she graduated from Yo High School and immediately enrolled at Texas State Technical College in Waco. Initially drawn to the precise work of the dental field, she trained as a dental assistant, but her true, long-term ambition was to become a registered nurse. It was during her college years that Darlene met the man who would irrevocably change the course of her life, Keith Gentry. Born just 2 months before Darlene on September 2, 1974, in Waco, Keith was the son of Weeman and Glenda Gentry. He was raised in Robinson, a town where the values of community and family were the bedrock of life. Keith was the quiet strength of his high school, known for his easygoing nature and remarkable reliability. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking. He was the man who simply and efficiently did what needed to be done. Like Darlene, he also attended Texas State Technical College, focusing on drafting and welding. This practical foundation led him to a stable, responsible future as an engineering assistant at a utility company. Keith had the soul of a provider, focused, hardworking, and committed to building a secure life. His friends and family often said he was a family man long before he ever settled down. When Keith and Darlene met, their chemistry was immediate and undeniable. Their connection deepened swiftly, pulling them into a deep love. Darlene's family welcomed Keith instantly. Keith's family embraced Darlene completely. To everyone around them, a wedding was not a possibility. It was an inevitability. But young love is rarely a straight line. By 1997, both had graduated and were standing on the cusp of their adult lives. Darlene quietly longed for an engagement ring, but Keith, for reasons unclear, was hesitant to commit to marriage or even cohabitation. After painful, honest conversations, they made the agonizing decision to part ways. Both families were blindsided. The separation devastated the couple. Seeking a necessary, clean break, Darlene relocated to Dallas, returning to dental work and attempting to adjust to the urban sprawl. But the fast-paced, disconnected city life didn't fit her. After a year, marked by the stress of a stolen car and a feeling of profound displacement, Darlene returned home. Fate, it seemed, was waiting. She and Keith soon crossed paths again. This time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. Their reunion was decisive, powerful, and swift. In 1999, Keith proposed. Not long after, they were married. The pieces had finally clicked into place. The young couple purchased their first home and began building the life they had always dreamed of. For Darlene, however, a nagging sense of incompletion lingered. She realized her true calling was in nursing. Motivated and determined, she went back to school, fully supported by Keith, who was proud to see his wife pursue her deep ambitions. They were, by every external measure, a happy couple. They laughed, they shared, and they embraced their new roles as partners in life. By the early 2000s, Keith and Darlene Gentry were settled into what appeared to be the perfect, quiet life in Robinson, Texas. Their suburban home stood in a peaceful cul-de-sac, conveniently located right next door to Keith's parents. Keith held his stable job at the local electric utility. Darlene worked as a registered nurse. With two solid incomes, they enjoyed a comfortable, secure lifestyle. But at the heart of their dreams was a family. Their first son, Chase, was born in 2001. Cody followed in 2004. And in 2005, they completed their family with a third son, Cade. Supported by two sets of doting grandparents, the Gentrys built a life rooted in love, stability, and tradition. They were the picture of the ideal family. Attractive, devoted parents, three beautiful boys, a meticulously maintained home. But the truth is that beneath that surface, the reality was beginning to fracture. Keith's job frequently required him to travel, leaving Darlene alone to manage her nursing shifts, the household, and the constant demands of three young boys. Yet, even when Keith was home, the balance rarely shifted. He was often emotionally and physically drained from his travels, seeking rest instead of diving into the glorious chaos of parenting. Recognizing the immense strain on their marriage, Keith made a difficult decision. He traded his better-paying, travel-heavy position for a lower-paid desk job that kept him close to home. It was a move born of love and practicality, but it came at a terrible cost. The significant reduction in income immediately strained their finances. Keith began to feel trapped in a job he found unfulfilling and dull. The challenge and momentum of his previous life were gone, replaced by a festering frustration. Meanwhile, Darlene's spending habits, reportedly, never changed. She maintained her pristine home, hosted gatherings, and continued to buy things they could no longer reasonably afford. Their arguments, now constant, almost always boiled down to money. Keith viewed her as careless with their hard-earned income. His resentment mounted as more and more childcare responsibilities fell not just on him, but on his elderly parents next door. Friends and family began to notice the shift. The once happy couple now moved around each other with a new, quiet tension. There was emotional distance, subtle complaints, and mounting pressure. Yet, there was never any clear indication that either Keith or Darlene wanted a divorce. Keith, in particular, seemed determined to hold the family together. But on the morning of November 9, 2005, everything changed. At precisely 6:11 a.m., a distressed Darlene Gentry called emergency services. Her voice was trembling as she described a scene ripped straight from a nightmare. The back door of their home was wide open. Her husband, Keith, was lying in bed, covered in blood, and only barely breathing. She immediately told the dispatcher that some of Keith's guns were missing, then described the horrific detail. Keith was making a gurgling sound, with pink foam bubbling from his mouth. Darlene claimed she had not slept beside her husband that night. Their youngest son, Cade, just 18 months old, had been restless. She asserted that she had taken the toddler into a separate bedroom with her other two sons, staying there, playing a movie, until 6 a.m. when she finally woke up. That's when she discovered the open back door and found her husband gravely wounded. Paramedics rushed to the Gentry residence. Keith was alive. He had been shot in the head and was completely unresponsive. The devastating pink foam, a sign of severe trauma, suggested he was unlikely to ever recover. Emergency crews rushed him to Hillcrest Baptist Medical Center in Waco, where he was immediately placed on life support. 2 days later, on November 11, 2005, Keith Gentry was tragically pronounced dead. A homicide investigation was immediately launched, and detectives quickly focused on the only other adult present in the home that night: Darlene Gentry. Darlene's version of events became the absolute center of the case. She was brought in for questioning almost immediately, and her story began with the evening of November 8th, which she claimed had started uneventfully. She had gone out for dinner and drinks with friends, returning home around 8:30 p.m. But what she walked into, she claimed, was not a warm welcome. Keith, according to Darlene, was instantly upset. He had discovered a restaurant receipt, evidence of yet another expenditure he viewed as reckless and irresponsible. A deep sting given their precarious financial state. The two quickly erupted into an argument. Darlene claimed she had left the house in frustration, driving around to cool off. When she returned later that night, she says she apologized and attempted to move past the disagreement. Keith went to bed in the master bedroom, and Darlene stated she stayed with their 3 young sons in one of the other rooms. She firmly insisted this unusual arrangement was solely to help settle their youngest child, who had been unusually fussy that night. She claimed she briefly woke around 5:15 a.m. after hearing their dog bark, but immediately dismissed it, accustomed to their pet barking at nothing, and drifted back to sleep. She recalled waking again around 6 a.m., getting out of bed, and walking through the house to wake Keith for work. When he didn't answer her call, she entered the master bedroom and found him lying in bed, utterly unresponsive and bleeding. She also noticed the back door was wide open and, chillingly, that their locked gun cabinet had been tampered with, its contents missing. Darlene's version of events painted a terrifying, clear-cut scenario. A nocturnal intruder had broken into their home, violently murdered her husband, and stolen firearms, leaving no viable trace behind. But as the investigation progressed, homicide detectives began to see troubling inconsistencies, glaring red flags that called Darlene's entire narrative into profound question. To begin with, the timing. Darlene insisted she hadn't checked on Keith until 6 a.m., but forensic analysis suggested the shooting occurred significantly earlier. The calculated trajectory of the bullet, the pooling of blood, and Keith's critical medical state all pointed to an attack that would have been virtually impossible to sleep through. More alarming evidence emerged at the scene. While Darlene had claimed multiple guns were stolen from the cabinet, investigators discovered several of the firearms stacked neatly just outside the back of the house. This meticulous arrangement was utterly inconsistent with the frantic actions of a typical burglar, who would likely grab and flee. In fact, it looked disturbingly like someone had carefully staged a scene. Adding to the overwhelming suspicion, only 2 adults had access to the locked gun cabinet: Keith and Darlene. Whoever opened it knew its precise location and, crucially, where the key was hidden. It made zero sense for a random intruder to possess such specific, intimate knowledge of the home's layout and security. Then there was Darlene's own conduct. As a trained, practicing, registered nurse, she possessed the skills and the required presence of mind to administer basic CPR, or, at the very least, check for vital signs of life. But she didn't. When paramedics arrived, she had made no attempts to help Keith, nor had she even left the room to guide emergency personnel. Instead, she remained locked in with the children, claiming sheer fear for their safety as her reason for inaction. Investigators noted another peculiar aspect: the 911 call itself. Rather than the raw, uncontrollable panic one expects from someone who has just found their spouse shot in bed, Darlene's voice was remarkably, unnervingly composed. She spoke clearly, offering a surprisingly detailed timeline of her actions and sleeping arrangements. Her tone sounded less like a woman in the midst of a crisis, and more like someone carefully explaining away suspicion. Later that same morning, Darlene sat down for a formal interview at the police station. But the moment the detectives' questions became direct, demanding, and probing, she instantly hesitated. Without warning, she invoked her Fifth Amendment right and demanded a lawyer. The interview immediately ceased. Despite this powerful act of self-incrimination, Darlene vehemently maintained her innocence. She claimed to have deeply loved her husband and insisted she would never do anything to harm him. She spoke candidly about their life, acknowledging the heavy financial strain and the exhaustion of raising 3 small boys, but fiercely insisted their problems were utterly ordinary, not the kind of conflict that leads to lethal violence. Still, investigators simply could not ignore the widening, dangerous gaps in her story. The growing mound of circumstantial evidence suggested something far more intimate and calculated than a random, tragic home invasion. As detectives dug deeper, the foundational questions continued to mount. Who had the strongest motive? Who had unrestricted access? And who had the perfect opportunity? Though Darlene's voice cracked with emotion in her statements, at times tearful, at times confused, her carefully chosen words did nothing to shift the burning suspicion away from her. She spoke convincingly of Keith's devotion to his boys and insisted that she loved him too. However, suspicion alone wasn't enough to secure a conviction. Authorities needed irrefutable, hard evidence. With Darlene's consent, they conducted a meticulous second search of the Gentry home. They found no signs of forced entry, but what they did find would prove devastatingly damning. Buried deep inside the kitchen trash bin, investigators uncovered a pair of latex gloves. Hidden within those gloves was a single .222 caliber shell casing, traces of gunshot residue, and DNA that pointed exclusively to two people, Keith and Darlene. It was the major breakthrough they had desperately sought. Then came the devastating motive. Detectives discovered that Keith had a substantial life insurance policy, valued between $500,000 and $750,000. For someone drowning in financial distress, that sum was more than enough to raise serious, immediate questions about intent. 19 days after the shooting, on November 28, 2005, Darlene Gentry was arrested and charged with murder. But the arrest didn't last long. That very same day, Keith's own parents, who had stood loyally by her side, posted a $50,000 bond to secure her immediate release. The Gentry family, including Keith's grieving mother and father, simply refused to believe Darlene could be capable of such an unthinkable crime. They stood by her, unwavering in their emotional support. To them, she wasn't just Keith's wife, but the beloved mother of their grandchildren, someone they trusted and cherished. But then, new and truly startling information emerged. Not long after her release on bail, Darlene contacted a local landowner and acquaintance, Robert Pavella. She expressed sudden interest in purchasing a rural piece of property near Axtell, Texas. The land featured a serene pond, and Darlene remarked that it reminded her of Keith's heartfelt dream to take their sons fishing. A touching sentiment if the story had ended there. But a few weeks later, Darlene called Pavella with a highly unusual request. She asked if he could fill in the pond. The sudden, jarring change was deeply suspicious. Just weeks earlier, she had been enthusiastic about the water feature, seeing it as a tribute to Keith's memory. Now she wanted it permanently gone. Pavella sensed something was profoundly wrong. Troubled by the request, he immediately contacted the authorities. Detectives instantly focused on the pond. If Darlene wanted it filled so badly, they reasoned, perhaps it was because it concealed something she didn't want found. A search was quickly organized, and what they discovered confirmed their sharpest instincts. At the bottom of the pond was a .222 caliber revolver, the exact same caliber as the shell casing found in the latex gloves. It was the murder weapon. Yet, despite the staggering circumstantial weight, investigators still craved a direct link, something undeniable and recorded. And so, they turned to Pavella again, this time asking him to help set a devastating trap. He agreed, posing as if he were complying with her request. Pavella called Darlene and said he was preparing to fill the pond, but first, he needed to drain it completely. Police were banking on the possibility that if Darlene knew the pond might be emptied, she'd act fast to remove any incriminating evidence still inside. She took the bait. Over the phone, Darlene remained calm and agreeable. She didn't object. She didn't panic. But the very next day, under the meticulous, watchful eyes of hidden surveillance cameras, she arrived at the property. Wearing wading boots and carrying a rod, she stepped directly into the water and began frantically poking and probing at the pond bed, at the very spot where authorities had already retrieved the gun. The entire incriminating event was recorded on video, and with that, Detectives had every shred of evidence they needed. In February 2007, Darlene Gentry, 32, stood trial in McLennan County, Texas. The trial lasted 5 tense days. She faced a charge of first-degree murder for shooting her husband while he slept in their Robinson home. The prosecution's case centered on that devastating surveillance video. Darlene in the pond, trying to recover the murder weapon days after it had already been seized. It was the crucial moment that completely shattered her defense. The gloves in the trash, the staged burglary, the conflicting timeline, all of it now pointed to one chilling, undeniable conclusion. Her defense team chose not to call any witnesses during the trial's guilt-innocence phase. They relied instead on cross-examinations and procedural arguments. But the evidence was simply too strong to overcome. On February 8, 2007, the verdict was delivered. Guilty of first-degree murder. Darlene Gentry was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The prosecution successfully argued that her motive was both deeply emotional and financial. She wanted out of her marriage, she wanted freedom, and she wanted the financial security that came with Keith's significant life insurance payout. In their final remarks to the jury, prosecutors warned against being swayed by mere appearances. Darlene is currently serving her sentence at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. In November 2017, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied her request for a new trial, and her conviction remains intact. According to official records, she will be eligible for parole in February 2037. If parole is denied, she will serve her full sentence until February 2067. Darlene Gentry has always maintained her innocence, but the brutal consequences of that November morning have reached far beyond her prison cell walls. In 2010, a judge granted permanent custody of Chase, Cody, and Cade to Keith's parents. A restraining order was issued prohibiting Darlene from having any contact with her sons. According to court documents, she hasn't spoken to them since. Keith Gentry was a man defined by quiet strength. A devoted father, a loyal husband, and a hard-working provider, he chose family over ambition, stability over status. He left behind 3 young boys, a grieving family, and a legacy built on integrity and love. Though his life was tragically cut short, those who knew Keith remember him not for how he died, but for how he lived. His memory endures in the hearts of his family, his friends, and especially in the lives of the sons he loved more than anything. If you enjoyed diving into the depths of this crime with us, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Into the Crime Depths, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new case. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe,